Good evening, everyone. I'm Larry Mohn, president of the Manhattan Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Manhattan Institute's annual Wilson Lecture. For 15 years, James Q. Wilson delivered an enormously popular annual lecture for us. The impressive variety of his topics, the criminal justice system, the roots of terrorism, and the nature of democracy, just to name a few, reflected Jim's wide-ranging intellect. After Jim passed away in 2012, we wanted to find a successor to carry on in his tradition of insightful, stimulating lectures, and we knew that was really only one person who could fill that role, and that's Ed Glazer. As you know, Ed is a polymath who uses economics as a tool to try to understand the world and figure out ways to improve the human condition. One of the great public intellectuals of our time, Ed is quite prolific, always provocative, and very perceptive. Nobel laureate Gary Becker once remarked that before Ed burst onto the scene in the early 1990s, urban economics was dried up. No one had come up with some new ways to look at cities. Ed continues to redefine economics, particularly urban economics, from his perch at Harvard, where he has taught since 1992. He's published dozens of papers on why cities rise and fall, and his 2012 book, Triumph of the City, became a New York Times bestseller. He serves as director of the Taubman Center for State and Local Government and director of the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston. And the Manhattan Institute is honored to count him as one of our adjunct senior fellows, as well as a contributing editor to City Journal. One of the first talks Ed gave for the Institute back in 2006 was titled, Why Are Skilled Cities Getting More Skilled? Today, he is revisiting the human capital theme with a discussion of whether 12 years later, we have reached, quote, the end of work. As someone who just sent in his final college tuition bill, let me say that I hope the answer to that question is a solid no. Please join me in welcoming Ed Glazer.
Thank you, Larry. I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to give this lecture. Obviously, I'm deeply honored to be giving a lecture with Jim Wilson's name on it. And I'm also deeply honored that you've given me your time. This is a somewhat unusual lecture in that it's actually not about the things that are at the core of my research. Instead, it's about the social problem that I think is actually America's largest. You may think it's very odd that an academic thinks that what he works on is not the most important thing in the world. That's actually quite unusual. This is something that has disturbed me, and I think it should disturb you as well. And my objective in the next 20 minutes is not to convince you that I think I know the right answers for dealing with this, but to convince you that this is the great social problem facing America today. Now, what you're looking at here is the employment rate. Not unemployment rate, not the labor force participation rate, the two of them put together for prime-aged males from roughly the late 1950s through to today. When I was born in 1967, 5% of prime-aged males were jobless. That had more or less been true for 20 years before that. Today, more than 15% of prime-aged males are jobless. This is an enormous change, and you can see from the data what happens is that during every crisis, the employment rate drops, and then it comes back maybe half as much. And I think that's what we're seeing again in this crisis. When you parse together what's been happening lately, and I'm putting this up so that you don't feel too good about the slight decline there at the end, although I'm not sure this crowd was likely to feel too good about that. When you look at the data cutting it apart, you see that, in fact, 25 to 34-year-old employment has come back. That, in fact, the young people, the people who were not immediately fired when they were in 2007, the people who were 17 in 2007, they are re-entering the labor force, they are working. But when you turn to the 35 to 44-year-olds, or, I didn't show you because it looks exactly the same, the 45 to 54-year-olds, they're out. Those drops are down, and they appear to be permanent, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. Now, Howard helpfully pointed out a report that's come out this month from the Council of Economic Advisors on this issue, on labor force participation, membership, employment of prime-age males. And needless to say, I don't agree with all of the recommendations in the CEA report, but I am glad that they're casting a light on this. And what this shows you is the triangles show you where we were in 1990. And if you look at 1990, so the U.S. was 10% for non-employment, which puts us less than Germany, puts us less than Australia, puts us less than Norway. Today we're at 17%, and we're in the territory of Belgium and the Slovak Republic. We're not quite Greece yet, but we're in a very different place. We are profoundly moving in the wrong direction. One thing I do want you to take away from this is it's not inexorable that you go in the wrong direction. Look in particular about Germany. So Germany was significantly higher in 1990 than it is today. This reflects real and hard changes that Germany made to its labor market practices, to its labor market laws over the past 15 years. And I think that is a minimum of what we're going to be required to do here in this country. Just a series of facts that relate to this. So there's a tripling of the share of non-employed prime-age males since 1976, 5% to 15.1%. In May 1996, there were 73.8 million Americans who were not employed. In May 26, adult Americans. In May 2016, you were up to 112 million, right? Huge, huge increase. The employment to population ratio differs enormously by education, okay? So 72.5% of college graduates are employed. 41.3% of high school dropouts are employed, right? Massive gaps with education within these groups. Of course, the background of this is a combination, and I will come back to this again and again. It's a combination of trends in the labor market that the government is not responsible for, and government policies which interact with them in an absolutely poisonous manner. Manufacturing employment has fallen from 18.3 million to 12.3 million. And there's been, of course, a massive rise in the number of disability recipients. This is a really boring graph, but it makes the point, right? So this is disability, 4 million people on the rolls in 1995. We're up to 9 million today. Massive change in disability, right? This is not because Americans have gotten sicker. This is not what's going on here. This is a choice about a public policy program that very strongly discourages people from working. And if there's a theme here, it is not that there's anything wrong with the well-meaning impulse to help people who've been hurt. Right? I understand that impulse, I believe in that. But there is something wrong when government policies put incredibly strong disincentives to people working. We all get upset when we think about high-skilled people who face marginal tax rates of 50%. It's bad, I agree with it. But those high-skilled people have relatively nice jobs. They go to work and they get respected. They have a tradition of work. How about when we have effective tax rates of 70%, 80%, 90% on people at the other end of the scale distribution? People who end up losing 30 cents on the dollar because their food stamps go down. They lose another 30 cents on the dollar because of their housing vouchers. They lose a bit more because of the earned income tax credit and other benefits that they'll also lose. We have effective tax rates for the poor that can be close to 100%, right? We don't need to look farther than that to understand why work looks so unappealing to so many Americans. Now, accompanying this, and this is, I think, a really important point, in some sense, if there weren't government policies that discouraged work, every unemployed person is a failure of entrepreneurial imagination, right? The recipe for this, the thing that needs to come out against underemployment is we need new startups, we need new ideas, we need new firms that will come up with new things for people to do. And yet we are at a point in which we have a crisis of entrepreneurship in this country, right? So these are the number of jobs created by young establishments. In the mid-1990s, we were over 4.5 million a year. Now we're under 3 million, right? Very large difference in this, very large decline in the amount of employment being created by new firms. Okay, now this is the backdrop. Now let's look at the public policy response. The focus is on income and wages, not on underemployment. So let me just give you a couple of quotes from our political leaders. From the 2016 State of the Union, third paragraph, equal pay for equal work, applause. Paid leave, applause. Raising the minimum wage, applause. All these things matter to hardworking families. I agree, but of course, they're probably not going to be working after all those things are done, right? Bernie Sanders leading the fight in the Senate for a $15 an hour minimum wage and a union for fast food workers, right? All the focus is on the wages. No focus at all on the underemployment problem. It's sort of a deaf ear to this massive wave that's troubling America. Nancy Pelosi, the unemployment insurance extension, right? And this is doubling the amount of time that you could get on unemployment insurance. And remember, for each month that you're on unemployment insurance, you face a major disincentive against preventing you from working, pushing you against working. The unemployment insurance extension would make a difference of 600,000 jobs to our economy, she claimed. I think I'd probably agree with her on that. It's just I think she has the sign wrong. I think it's far more likely to eliminate 600,000 jobs than to create 600,000 jobs. Now, I take the view that unemployment is a far worse social problem than stagnant wages. And I think there's a fair amount of data to support this view. That in fact, making sure someone's wages are going up by 4% rather than 2% is very, very small potatoes relative to making sure that more Americans have jobs, have a meaningful connection, feel like their lives have a purpose, feel like they're contributing to society. Let me just summarize a set of facts on this. So there's strong data on unhappiness, and I'll show you a bar on this, that the unemployed are deeply unhappy. Suicide rates are dramatically higher for the unemployed, and there appears to be a strong correlation there. Divorce rates go up very substantially, about doubling the rate for the unemployed. Drug abuse, I'll show you a fact on that, much higher for the unemployed. And unemployment, non-employment, has a pervasive and painful tendency to become permanent, right? And that's the last point that I'll make, that short spells can turn into long spells. Okay. So this comes from my own work on unhappy cities, looking at the reduction in happiness relative to being employed and earning over $75,000. So if, let's say, you earn $60,000, and this is on a 1 to 4 scale, so it's 1 is miserable, 4 is gleeful, right? You lose, maybe 0.16 of a point. If you go down to 35 to 50K, you lose maybe 0.25 of a point on this 1 to 4 scale, right? If you lose your job, if you're unemployed for more than a year, it's a reduction of 1 on this 4-point scale. It's a difference 5 times as large as any of these things. How in the world you could look in this data and think the important point is to move people up from 33K to 37K relative to making sure that people don't end up in this bottom category, in this awful category where they're miserable. Now, economists have had a tendency to often understate the costs of unemployment, right? After all, maybe unemployment's voluntary. Maybe people are having a great time being unemployed. I think if there's anything that I've taken away from behavioral economics, it is that this is the wrong way to think about unemployment. That in fact, this is not some happy state of leisure. This is a state that traps you and makes you miserable, and people are unable to muster some way to change things. Now, one of the graphs, one of the tables that's very helpful in this Council of Economic Advisors slide is just showing what the time use is of this is non-participating prime-aged men. Now, I think this is helpful. I had a graph previous to this which included all non-participating people, men and women, and the truth of the matter is women, when they're not in the labor force, actually do useful things. They actually take care of their families. They do a whole bunch of nice stuff. What do boys do? Well, mostly it's TV, okay? There's a lot of television, right? So the number of minutes spent per day socializing, relaxing, leisure is 472 minutes. I don't think I've done that in the last year. In terms of number of minutes spent socializing, and 335 minutes a day watching television, right? So maybe if you started with the hypothesis that actually watching TV made you happy, you would be surprised by the low happiness data, but I think, in fact, this is not a recipe for feelings of life satisfaction, spending 5.5 hours a day watching television, but that's exactly what they're doing. They do sleep a little bit more, but they spend no more time caring for household members. Now, there's new work, and this is from a paper last year that came out in Lancet Psychiatry, showing what shouldn't surprise you, that unemployment is associated with massively more suicides than slowdowns in economic growth. That, in fact, suicide is very tightly tied to these disruptions from the labor force, to being alone, to being socially disconnected. And this is a very Wilsonian point to a certain extent, right? We are social creatures. It's why cities are so successful. The bonds to people around us keep us healthy, keep us whole, make us smarter, make us stronger. The terrible thing about non-employment is you break those bonds, right? You're away in your home watching television. You lose all the support networks that all of us have around us in various ways. And this has catastrophic impact on life satisfaction. It also has catastrophic impacts on divorce rates. This was actually the most legible version of this. There are many studies that find this. This is from Finland, I think. But this is a very easy-to-read metric, which is just divorces per 1,000 marriage years. So if you compare employed with the husband being unemployed, the divorce rate goes up by about 80% relative to the spouse being employed. So a massive increase in this. Whereas if you look across husband's income, between 1 and 5, there's almost no difference. Income isn't causing this huge difference. It's unemployment. It's these disruptions. It's the social disconnection that is so powerful. This is drug use. Again, very moderate effects on income, very large effects of being non-employed. So about 18% of the unemployed have used an illegal substance in the last month, as opposed to about 8% of the population as a whole. Again, massive difference here. And then this is from my own work on opioid deaths. So what we've done here is we've just looked at the relationship between the rise in opioid deaths between 1992 and 2012 and the share of the population on disability in 1991. And as you can see, it's this variable that in our data set that has the strongest correlation with the rise in opioid deaths is what share of the population was on DI 25 years ago. Now, there are several things rolled up in that. That is about joblessness, that is about hopelessness, but it's obviously also about things that happen with disability as well. This is one of the many papers showing the long-run impacts of unemployment. And what this shows you is what happens if you get laid off at 22. So that's that jump in unemployment. You get back your job eventually, although 10% of the people still 5 years later have not. But you have a permanent impact of about about 5% on your wages going forward. So these early unemployment spells are not free by any stretch of the imagination. They're not a temporary blip. They're a permanent change to your labor market outcomes. Now, this is, and I apologize for this, this is a 20 or 15-year-old graph from a really, really great paper. It's just the graphics are awful. And what this is just showing is the clusters of unemployment rates across a series of European countries over the period 1960 to 2000. Now, the point that this paper by Olivier Blanchard and Justin Wilfers makes is that it was the combination in Europe of their labor market protections, their labor market policies, and the adverse economic shocks. So you started having social democracy in the 60s and 70s, right, 60s and early 70s. Very little effect, because when the economy was humming along, these safeguards didn't come into play, and they didn't start working their pernicious side effects. By the 1980s, when you had the disruption of the oil shocks, all of a sudden you have people laid off, and the cocoon of the system takes over. And then all of a sudden, they are in a system in which they no longer have incentives to go to work. They have incentives to stay home. They're connected to people who are out of work rather than being in work. And hysteresis sets in. Long-run unemployment follows from this. Now, in some sense, there's a difference between Europe, Northern Europe and Southern Europe in its reaction to this. And this is the Germany point. This is the Sweden point. Variety of northern social democracies 15 years ago, 20 years ago, saw this and responded, right? And they sensibly understood that they could not go on with this system. So they changed things. They loosened up their labor markets. They moved in with more sensible policies to provide social insurance. Whereas Southern Europe, Italy, Greece, Spain did nothing. And those problems are still very much with us. They're unable to make the changes. And you have to ask yourself tonight, are we Norway, are we Germany, or are we Greece? Right? Because we're very much at that threshold right now as a country, whether or not we're going to go one way or the other. Now, I'm just going to go through a few of the policies that I think make up the war on work. And again, they're motivated by very understandable reasons. They're motivated by a desire to make the lives of people who do work better, right? But they're not motivated with any attempt to try and solve the underemployment problem. So extending UI is one example, and these drastic extensions of unemployment insurance in the face of the recession worked, I think, in exactly the wrong direction, because they eliminated the incentives to actually go back to work. Food stamps and housing vouchers, I've already mentioned. Each one of these programs separately imposes a 30% tax on earnings. Disability payments, permanent discouragement to work, enormous tax on workings. And today we're in the midst of a $15 minimum wage craze, right? And I'll go back to this in a little bit in terms of the new evidence that occurs on the minimum wage. But because American minimum wages stayed so low for so long, we were in a position in which we sort of came to forget that minimum wages actually can have major effects. Because we compared New Jersey and Pennsylvania with these very tiny differences, and we didn't see huge differences in employment. So that led us to conclude, well, even if you have huge minimum wages, it won't matter. It's the wrong conclusion. And there's a nice new paper that I'll show you in a second that shows just how costly higher minimum wages were in the tooth of the recession to low-skilled workers. So let me just show you a little bit of the data you should know on this. Now, this is a very classic paper by Bruce Meyer. There are debates around this, but the basic fact is along the x-axis is the weeks until your UI payments run out. And what you're supposed to take away from this is that there's sort of a 5% chance of getting a job during all the time you're getting UI, and then it suddenly sparks up just as UI payments are running out. Right? So that's this fact. I think it's a very telling fact that when the cash runs out, you suddenly start looking for work. Right? Which means that if I suddenly double the number of weeks that you're getting UI, I'm going to keep the number of weeks that you're not looking for work there. This is a paper by Otter, Duggan, Greenberg, and Lyle. And what they're looking at is the extension of disability compensation for veterans. And this was particularly for type 2 diabetes, and it was motivated by Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. And what this meant was that those people who had boots on the ground in Vietnam had access to this, and the people who served during exactly the same time period did not. Okay? So they're able to compare these two groups, which look relatively similar, both before and afterwards. And what you see is after in 2001, when this change happens, there's a huge gap that widens up between the boots on the ground people versus the non-boots on the ground people, right? Large amounts of take-up for this group. And among the group that takes it up, 20% of them leave the labor force. Okay? Even though, in fact, disability compensation doesn't have the same strong negative effects as normal disability, they're still getting out of the labor force. Guaranteed basic income. Now, this is actually an idea that, let me just remind you of the differences between guaranteed basic and guaranteed minimum. And this is in some sense the alternative to how we want to think about UI and disability insurance. When people talk about guaranteed minimum incomes, they mean a means-tested thing where you get some fixed amount as you earn more, that gets taxed away. You don't get any of that. You just fix it some cap. Guaranteed basic, the economics of that, apart from the fact that it's totally infeasible to fund, the economics are much better because you're actually just giving people cash and that's it. No strings attached. So if you actually had an infinite amount of cash, it would be a perfectly reasonable thing, no negative incentives from it. Now, the absence of an infinite amount of cash does pose a slight problem from implementation. But the idea of guaranteed basic income is actually relevant for disability insurance and unemployment insurance. The pernicious effects of these are because they discourage work, are because they're tied to not working. The government, I cannot tell you what an awful thing I think this is, that our government creates such strong incentives to stop people from going to work, right? Something like that says when you get unemployed, you just get a check based on your expected duration. Maybe we require you to look for work while you're getting the check, but we don't stop the payments when you go back to work, right? Something that's just a smaller check overall. Same thing with disability, right? We give them a check, there's a proven medical condition, you give them some fixed amount, you don't reduce it, right? In some sense, this puts the normal fears about disability on its head. Often the fears about disability are that, oh gosh, it's terrible that he's working while he's getting disability, right? This is some clear case of fraud. We should worry less about fraud and worry more about the fact that we're stopping people from using their talents to make the world better, right? That is, in fact, the more important problem. The natural way to get rid of both is to just give people a check or give people a series of checks over time and don't make it dependent upon them not working. The government needs to stop bribing people to be idle, right? This is the fundamental point here. The minimum wage. Now, we have a new surgence of work on the minimum wage, and Jeff Clemens, who was a former student from Harvard, has a terrific new paper that looks at the impact of the minimum wage during the teeth of the Great Recession. So again, 20 years ago, there was this spate of papers around New Jersey and Pennsylvania that purported to find no effect. What happened after 2007 was there was a series of bumps up in the federal minimum wage that actually hit poorer parts of America. Right? Not New Jersey, not Pennsylvania, places that are actually low-wage states. And it mattered, and it particularly mattered for low-skilled people. And this shows you the share unemployed of young high school dropouts in states that were bound by the federal minimum wage increases and states that were not bound. Now, first of all, note that the states that were bound, that means they had lower minimum wages to begin with. They started out with a lot more employment for those low-skilled workers, right? They started out with more young high school dropouts working because, in fact, they didn't have a minimum wage, or at least that's one plausible view. Then it starts falling as the minimum wage comes in. It falls and it falls again and it falls again. And by the end of it, once the minimum wages, they're all lower and they've converged on each other. You cease to have the difference. Clemens' estimate is that there's a 5.6% decrease in employment for this group due to the minimum wage, which represents about 43% of the overall decline in the employment rate for this group. Right? The minimum wage is not a free lunch, and certainly moving wages to $15 an hour is certainly going to be a recipe for disaster for the less skilled workers of our service industries. There's a nice paper 20 years ago now that by Dear Murphy and Welch, which came out during this earlier spate, that made the point that the New Jersey versus Pennsylvania stuff was just too small. And they urged us instead to look at Puerto Rico, which actually had much higher minimum wages relative to their earnings. So here, the Cates Index is showing the ratio of minimum wage to average wage. And there you've got the unemployment rate. You should see the, but it's actually close to 1 over there. It actually gets quite high over there on the other side. The employment rate, when it goes up, the employment rate goes down. You get a very substantial elasticity of Puerto Rican employment when they're imposing a much more stringent minimum wage than we did in the Continental 48. The employment rate fell much more dramatically. Now, when I think about this boom for the minimum wage, I think, in fact, the thing that upsets me most is about the morality of it. It's not the economics are bad, but it's this perverse notion that we're going to have redistribution in this country, and you know who we're going to get to pay for it? Not taxpayers, right? Not, people who have means. We're going to get the customers of Walmart to pay for the minimum wage. We're going to get the people who are buying hamburgers at McDonald's in high-poverty areas. You know what? They're the people we're going to ask to pay for the minimum wage, because when you impose higher wages in this service industry, in these service industries, it's going to be passed along to customers, right? And that means we are, in fact, trying to do redistribution on the backs of the poor. That's what this is, in fact, all about. And it's an absolutely daunting thing. On top of the fact that, to the extent to which the only groups in this world that I think of in this country that are actually fighting hard to solve the underemployment problem are the people who are employing less skilled workers. They should be held up as heroes, not treated as villains to be particularly penalized. Now, is there a better path? Sure. Can I promise that we solve this whole thing? No. But there are obvious ways to move in the right direction rather than in the wrong direction. One of the bright lights that we had in this country over the last 25 years in terms of getting people to work was the Earned Income Tax Credit. Right? The idea is right, it has a positive effect on people working, but it's deeply complicated. Right? It's a recipe for fraud in lots of ways. Make it simpler. Right? Make it push the wage up for less skilled workers, but do it through the tax code, do it through our spending rather than through imposing it on workers. Eliminate the payroll tax for lower earning workers. Make work pay as much as you can. It will be costly, it's not free, but it makes a lot more sense than trying to impose it by raising the minimum wage for service industries. Eliminate all joblessness requirements in federal programs. Get rid of any part of disability insurance or UI that means payment contingent upon not working. Right? This is a thing that could be done. We'd have to reduce the amount in some cases, but there's no reason why you need to make these things contingent upon not working. You could make things means tested in terms of how much people earn, but I never want to see another government program that actually pays people not to work, that discourages people from going to work. Reduce payroll taxes for low-income workers, deregulate entrepreneurship, and I'll talk a little bit about innovation zones, and experimental skill programs. And I'll talk a little bit about the Possible Project, which I'm trying to evaluate in Boston. Okay, so does this stuff work? Well, we have a great example from Norway, which actually experimented with a disability program. And the way they experimented was up to a threshold. They said you could keep $1 for every 2 that you make. Okay? So instead of once you go over the income, it's all gone. It's all you're losing your DI, right? In this case, you get to keep 50 cents on the dollar. And this shows you, this red line shows you the effective tax rate. And you can see it's 50 cents on the dollar here, and then it keeps on going. And this is the sort of maximum income that you're allowed to earn. The gap between this line and this line shows you the extra people working here. So these are the people who didn't get this program. These are the people who did get the program. And the reason why there was this difference was that it was a hard date where if you got your disability payments before, I think it was Jan 1, 2004, you could get this program and not afterwards. So it was a clear cutoff, so you could compare right before and right afterwards. Very dramatic differences in terms of employment between these two groups. I think the number is like 8% increase in employment for the people who had the elimination of the disincentive not to work. There's no reason why we couldn't do this. There's no reason why Norway should be capable of serious reform in this area and we should not be able to. The Possible Project, skills. So again, we've got to reform our government programs, but we've also got to think about how to provide training for people in a way that actually makes a difference. So I'll just mention what the Possible Project is. It trains kids in Cambridge Public School to be entrepreneurs. It does so in a way that starts off by having them sell things on eBay, pretty much the simplest form of entrepreneurship that you could imagine, and then walks them up through makerspace and so forth. They're moving it into Madison Park High School in Boston, which is a vocational school, a deeply troubled vocational school. I don't know that this will work, which is why we're doing a randomized controlled trial on it. But what we need in this country is not to think that we know the answer. What we need is a flourishing of all the kind of innovative ideas that people in this room have. We need a flourishing of private sector initiatives to try and bring skills, to try and teach people how to become entrepreneurs, how to find promise in places where they didn't think there was one. The Possible Project may work. If it does work, we'll scale it up. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. This is how things should work in this world. innovation centers. So this is last year I was talking a little bit about, 2 years ago I was talking a little bit about trying to create enterprise zones within high poverty areas. And let me be entirely clear what I mean by this. There are two ways to think about a zone, one of which is a subsidy zone, a place in which we're just going to bribe people to locate, which is basically what empowerment zones are. I think this is almost surely not the right way to go. The jobs that come out of that are deeply expensive. The other vision of a zone is it's a reform zone. It's a place where you can try things that you couldn't get throughout the city as a whole. So for example, one-stop permitting. There's a town in Massachusetts called Devens, which in the wake of the shutting down of Fort Devens, gained a Devens Enterprise Commission that engages in one-stop permitting. Right? So it means you go, there's one person. The beauty of this is there's one person who's in charge of making sure the business gets through. Right? And I want to sort of call out Michael Hendricks, who's here, who's done such a great job with the chamber in terms of measuring just how awful our local regulations are in terms of making things hard for businesses. Right? If I could get one-stop permitting for businesses in Boston as a whole, I would take it. I can't. Right? So we do it for a small part within it. We do it with the most attractive area to do it. We see whether or not it works, and hopefully we scale it up. We continue pushing on it. Now, unsurprisingly, the city of Boston has proven much more enthusiastic about doing things that look fun, like this, rather than actually deregulating. I'll take what I can get. So this involves creating some degree of, again, training and social connection in these areas. But we need to continue pushing on this because, in fact, entrepreneurs are our answer. And that things need to be held together. And every time we put a barrier on entrepreneurship, we're saying no to a poor kid who could have a better future, who might not be sitting on the couch for 350 minutes a week, but might instead be 350 minutes a day and might in fact be doing something productive, might in fact be fulfilling their dreams. I want to stop. I had to check whether or not I have told this story or not, but it's one of my favorite stories of local entrepreneurship and regulations. And it's a story about Detroit. And maybe about 5 years ago, there was a cause célèbre of this poor woman who runs a food truck. This is her food truck, the Pink Flamingo. And she wanted to start her food truck in Detroit. Now, food trucks are a pet cause of mine. I actually eat at a food truck 4 or 5 times a day, and I've eaten at a food truck for 25 years, right? I think they're a fantastic form of urban innovation. And they're fantastic for this particular area, right? They enable people to get started, to actually do something new and creative, right? But they're so often held back by rules, as this poor woman was by Detroit's rules. Now, the idea that Detroit is saying no to any entrepreneur, right, seems like absolute madness, right? And particularly to this very appealing, thing. But local restaurateurs being local restaurateurs, this is what the last thing that they wanted. So I was on an NPR show about maybe 5 years ago with this woman and with the ombudsman of the city of Detroit, right? And there he was, this poor, nice guy, the city ombudsman, who was being pummeled, right? Pummeled, because it's totally indefensible what he's doing. And finally, after an hour of being just exhausted, he says, "Oh, lady, just go ahead and start your food truck. We'll never catch you." So I guess I wanted to end on that story because it does give me hope, right? America is a country full of entrepreneurial people, people of vision, and people who for centuries have been coming up with jobs, coming up with new ideas that not just make them rich, but also employ thousands of other people. We can do that again. But we need to have a change of policies that both improve skills, improve vocational training, improve entrepreneurial training. We need to figure out how to do this. We need to reduce regulations. We need to make sure that it's easy to start a food truck, not hard. And we need to stop paying people not to work, right? And those 3 changes are the fight ahead. And I hope you'll join me in this fight, because I think there's no more important one for our country. Thank you. Yes, sir. Dean's bringing it up.
Thank you. Michael Myers, New York Civil Rights Coalition. I have a question about the other side.
About which?
The other side of leisure, which is your topic, the end of work. What about the work ethic? What's the trends and the data with respect to retirement? Do people retire after a long time because they work too hard and therefore they retire and looking forward to leisure? Or do they stop working and then get bored by not working and go into leisure? And what about the issue of work ethic by those who are employed? How do we know that people who are employed particularly with respect to unions, are actually working as opposed to using social media all day?
So there are two questions involved in here, one of which is about retirement. And retirement's a mixed bag. There are lots of people who have significant issues at retirement who find it deeply jolting and a source of misery, and many of them come back. Some people are able to find tremendous value in it. And I think, again, it's making sure that your life has purpose. Right? If your retirement is something that is, you're doing things. I think of my 90-year-old grandmother who is still doing literacy training for people in her town. She never ran out of stuff. Whereas it seems like every cab driver I have in Veterans Taxi in Boston is a guy who retired 2 years ago and couldn't stand it and is now driving a car because they just were so miserable being alone, or their wife was so miserable to have them home that they had to send them back. The second question was about work ethic, and I think the government's job is not to work against that. I am worried about trusting the federal government, certainly, with being in charge of providing any ethical training for anyone. I do think as a parent, that's about as important a job as I have. I do think as members of social groups, as members of our community, as neighbors, as people who go to our churches, our synagogues, or whatever, that's where that training is communal as well. But I think it's harder to think that actually it's a public role. Although certainly I like a mayor who will speak for the virtues of hard work rather than the opposite.
But what's the impact of unionization on work?
Unionization on, I think it depends a lot on which type of unions where. So I'll just tell a story on this. That my experience on unions, I'll just tell a personal story. So 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I did a town hall with Mayor Walsh when he was just elected. And we were there at 6:30 in the morning setting up. It was actually in Roxbury Community College, and it was where the ideas for this stuff came from. And we had two partners for this. We had members of Mayor Walsh's team. You've got to remember, Mayor Walsh comes out of the construction unions. It's his world. And let me tell you, at 6 a.m., his guys were there. They were there for him. Every single one of them were there, and they were working like dogs, right? Our other partners were the teaching staff of Roxbury Community College. They were less present. I think when we think about unions, right, we need to recognize that there's a lot of heterogeneity. That some of them can actually work quite well and function well. I think they usually work most well when they're in highly competitive industries, when they're not allowed to be on both sides of the bargaining table. Whereas when we think about public sector unions, it's much more mixed, right? Maybe not even mixed. So I think having a one-size-fits-all view about unions is not right. But certainly they can do pernicious things, and they can also do good things. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. If I interpreted the chart correctly, I'm curious why it seemed that both the unemployed and the employed are sleeping more than 12 hours a day. But that is not actually my question. It's well established that throughout history, technology and innovation have created more jobs than they destroy.
So it's other, just to be clear on this, it's other including sleep. So it's all of the other categories. So it's other including.
My mistake.
It's not just sleep.
Hence my premise, if I interpreted the chart correctly.
That's right.
So to technology and innovation, these days more and more economists are saying that this time it's different, including economists on the right. What is your view on what technology and innovation are doing now, and what will they do over the next generation, independent of government regulatory things? What's happening? Is there a new trend or not?
So certainly it is true when you think about the difference between, let's say, a Bill Gates and a Henry Ford, right? Henry Ford innovated in ways that employed hundreds of thousands of less skilled Americans, right? The innovators of the computer age have done much less of that, right? That many of their innovations have been, particularly ones that have employed highly skilled workers of a variety of different forms. And it's in fact hard to think of really great examples. There's one that I'm going to come to in a second, but it's hard to think of that many really great examples of tech entrepreneurs who actually move towards employing lots of less skilled workers. It's not their world, it's not where their imagination lay. And in some sense, I blame maybe perhaps the spatial isolation of Silicon Valley, the fact that it's impossible to build anything for under $5 million there, and they don't actually see poor people around them, so it's not natural for them to employ them, perhaps. But whatever it is, the bulk of the technology has moved in the wrong direction from the point of view of employing less skilled Americans. But we have a glaring counterexample right now, right, which is Uber. Right? Uber is exactly the opposite. It is an example of a company that employs, provides employment, provides entryway employment for lots of less skilled people. And if you didn't face major distortions, it's hard not to think that in the longer run, more entrepreneurs are going to see that promise, right? See that there are people who actually would like connections with the labor force, would like to find some work, and yet they're not able to currently, and that's an opportunity. Again, it's my point that sort of every underemployed person is a failure of entrepreneurial imagination, and we've got a lot of entrepreneurial imagination in this country. So I don't take the view at all. I think it is unquestionably true, as a matter of fact, that the last 40 years have been ones that have skewed highly towards skilled workers, and the bulk of the high-end entrepreneurship in this country has been targeted towards higher skilled employees. But there's nothing written in stone about that, right? And there's no sense is technology some exogenous force that entirely fits this. When there are opportunities, right, when there are underemployed workers, smart people will figure out how to take advantage of that. And that's exactly what Uber did, and I think we'll see more about this, as long as we don't regulate them away, right, as long as we don't make it impossible for them to work. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm Lee Bose. I'm the CEO of America Works, and I totally am amazed by your data, and I think it's fantastic because we work with disadvantaged people, getting them jobs all the time, and see all those disincentives. One of the things you haven't addressed, which we see every day, is how much work socializes people. If you think of inner city young people or people coming out of prison, minorities who've never worked, when you get them a job, they suddenly talk differently, they walk differently, they dress differently, they engage in the broader world. And that's so valuable. And so many of the people on the far left who think that income support is just the best thing don't see it. They've never talked to these people. So the last vestige of socialization is actually work in our society, because as communities have broken down and church breaks down and schools have broken down, employment still provides that. So I just wanted to ask you if you've looked at that, because to us, that's one of the most valuable things.
I think you're so right. I could not agree with this point more strongly. We do know, of course, that the only thing that I know that's hard data that goes along with this is that so much of human capital accumulation occurs on the job, of a variety of different forms. And some of that's cognitive, but almost assuredly the more important skills that are learned for most workers are social, or how to get along. The one thing I want to push you a little bit on is, unquestionably it's true for the population that you're talking about, but I think it's true for my own nephews as well. I think it's not just an issue of people from broken homes. I think it's any 21-year-old, right, in modern society has typically been told that they're brilliant for far too long and been allowed to get away with stuff by loving parents of a variety of different forms. And the job is the first place that they actually learn that that isn't actually a way to function in this world, that you actually need to be more focused on delivering service to people around them. So I think it's not just about the bottom end of the skill distribution. I think it's about all of us. And I think it's actually, I think it was true for me as well. I think it's absolutely right. Yes, sir. Oh. Where's the mic?
We have an event coming up in November, and to the extent that you can discern their policies, and quite independent of their personal qualities, would you care to comment on how the two presumed presidential candidates might influence the things you're talking about?
I'm going to keep on burying my head in the sand on this one and hope it goes away. It won't. This election reminds us why it is so important that we have institutions like the Manhattan Institute that stand for reason and evidence. We just need to be talking about the problems that matter and the right way to have evidence-based policy responses to those problems. I am amazed by how much, often there are mild disagreements, but once you have sort of people who believe that evidence makes policy, right? You get to some place that's very far away from either candidate very quickly, and some place that I am vastly more comfortable with. So I think the important point right now is to just keep on standing up for for reason, for knowledge, for focusing on the problems that matter, and for fighting for an America that's about being being great, but also being sensible and being focused on delivering skills and uplifting everyone. I promised Sandra.
Thank you very much. I was wondering if the question.
Gotta wait for the mic though. Sorry.
Three things. Number one, could you flesh out more about how, what programs, how Roxbury encourages entrepreneurship? Number two, I ran across a gentleman yesterday who was president of the New York City Department of Commerce. And I was not aware that the Department of Commerce supports entrepreneurship. I'd like you to talk about that. Number three, the Isle of Jersey and the Channel Islands does not give social welfare unless you work. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it happens, I'm going to take the last one first. It happens that I spent some time in Jersey this year. It happens that, in fact, my first New York ancestor came there from the neighboring island of Guernsey in 1820, so I have family roots in these islands. There's not a huge amount, I think, that, obviously, I think that a variety of this sort of program is sensible, but they're in a, they're in a world in which they're so privileged in so many ways in Jersey and Guernsey. I mean, the weather is fantastic. They have these set of rules that make it very easy to be financial hubs. It's hard to think that they're going to be a great example, but they certainly do many sensible things. The other thing to worry about in terms of Jersey is they're very dominated by a few large firms, and they're actually not great on the entrepreneurship front at all, and that's sort of a big issue that Guernsey had. I remember having this conversation with a reporter in I think it was Guernsey, who said, well, why would anyone be an entrepreneur? Why wouldn't they want to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers for the next 20 years? And I said, you will not believe this, but there are people graduating from Stanford today, Stanford Business School, who if you told them they would have a thrice failed entrepreneur in 20 years, they would tell you that's vastly better than being a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers in 20 years, which they found completely implausible. So let me see, I got caught on Jersey, Guernsey. The first one was? How does Roxbury? Okay, so it starts with a social space, and it starts with programming on it. So there's a Roxbury Innovation Center. There's a person there who tries to make sure there are programs that bring people in. The Possible Project is actually a well-designed program that works people through steps. So again, it starts them doing things like selling things on eBay and then moves them into making things that then moves them along. So it's a more clearly thought out program. Roxbury is just in the process of being worked out, and it's based on the model of the Innovation District on the waterfront, which was fabulously successful, but not at all targeted towards poorer Bostonians, very much towards wealthier Bostonians. And your middle one was?
Had to do with the Chamber of
Oh, yeah, okay. So just yes. So New York, over the past 15 years, has done a number of things to try and encourage entrepreneurship. Many of them I support. Some of them, one of my favorite things was they had this great map of all the permits that you need to go through to get to being to start your restaurant, to start your shop, which was fabulous on one level, so you could actually learn what you needed to do. The problem was there were 17 things that you needed to go through. So at the very least, they didn't solve the fact that you needed 17 different permits, but at least they did show you that you needed those 17 permits, and I guess that was a step in the right direction. But I think we'd hope for more going forward. And Dean, what? Okay, I don't. Somebody else should choose. Why don't you choose someone in back and then go in front? Then we'll.
Oh, first, I thank you. The problem is I agree with everything you say, but what really upsets me is that we're preaching to the choir. I want to focus you on the union thing. You said sometimes unions play a good role. I have a problem with that. Unions are basically a restraint of trade. It basically is contrary to competition. I mean, I happen to live in a co-op, and you can't get into the Union 32B, which is a non-skilled job. You open the door, you press the button for the elevator, and these guys, some of them are working 2 shifts. And there is a lot of undergrad, you know, people who can't even make the minimum wage, would love those jobs. How do you justify any union if you believe in free competition and the free market?
Well, wait a minute. So what I justify is I justify any free association or almost any free association of adults. To the extent to which you're forming a social group of some form, I think that should be legal in this country. I think the Constitution protects it. Do I think that unions have by and large been a force for, increasing employment? No. By and large, they've been a force for raising wages and reducing employment. So I don't disagree with that as a general point. But I think there are also things that unions can do around socializing people in other areas, which are not always terrible. And indeed, I just gave that example that of those construction workers. There are times when, in fact, having these social connections are not the worst thing in the world. So that's all that I'm saying. I'm not deeply unfriendly to what you're saying, but
the wage fixing, not the. I'm all in favor of the social part.
And the training, and there's also vocational training that goes on. But yes, I think it's I think it can be a significant problem. Kay.
Kay Heimowitz of the City Journal. There was an article in the Times, if I can mention that name, this week, by Neil Irwin. And he said that actually the countries in Western Europe that have more regulation than we do and higher minimum wages actually have less underemployment. Number one, is that correct? And number two, what do you make of it?
Well, you can look at it. Right, so there we are. Right, we're looking pretty bad. It's certainly true. It is certainly true that Sweden and Germany are not completely free of regulations, but they did rethink their regulations 15 years ago and make them considerably more sensible. I think the right view. I mean, if I were going to have sort of a 2-factor model of this, it would be about regulations that stymie entrepreneurship, and that's bad. And that's bad in Europe. I mean, it can be more or less bad depending on how poorly it's designed, but that's bad in Europe and it's bad here. And then on the other set is skills. And I think there's no question that you look at the German educational system and you think it does a much better job at delivering skills at the bottom end. So I think the right answer is not that Germany has a better labor force participation in the US because they've regulated their labor market. That feels crazy to me. It's that they've actually done a vastly better job of providing vocational training, of getting less skilled people into the workforce. So I think that's the right lesson to take away from this, not that we should be imposing more arbitrary regulations on the American workforce.
Oh. Thank you. If you think about what the trends are in innovation, it seems like robotics as well as artificial intelligence are clear trends. Maybe exacerbated by minimum wage on the robotics side, but eventually a lot of the low labor jobs will be taken over by machines, and potentially even the services jobs will be taken over by machines. What are the implications for that, and what have you thought about that?
Again, this is related to the previous thing. I don't think any of this is inevitable. I think it is true that the long-run role of human production is unlikely to be in manufacturing in any reasonable shape, although there's a small amount of artisanal stuff around the edges, but that's hardly going to be a huge employment. It's services. I mean, it's service employment. And there are lots of reasons why. I mean, there's a phrase that I used about why cities aren't going away with all this telecommunication, which is that connecting in cyberspace is never going to compare with sharing a meal or a kiss or a smile. In the same sense, there's no way that having an electronically delivered stuff is going to compare with having a really good service experience. Right, as we all know, if you have an interaction with someone in a store, in a car, in anywhere else who actually is charming and pleasant, it's a delight. It's an absolutely delightful thing. The question is whether or not the people who are out of the labor force can actually deliver this, and this is why these social skills are so important. That in fact, if you don't have people with the social skills to function well in the service industry, it's a big problem, and you are going to replace them all with machines. So I think there is a world, again, the sort of view of technological determinism is just wrong. I mean, it's not that anything is set in stone on this. It is that these new technologies do create challenges, unquestionably, but they can be met, but they need to be met with some combination of skills and having sensible regulations, sensible benefit programs that don't discourage people from working, stopping people from being entrepreneurs. But I can imagine a world in which we have a very heavy service sector that is actually well functioning, that finds jobs for people who are less skilled, and that does employ people. I don't see any reason why that can't happen. Final question. Okay, great. I could go all night. I really don't want to end.
Well, we'll make this go on all night. I just want to come back to the technology side. And you gave a specific example, unintentionally perhaps, to the question of earlier about the tech guys. I'm the last guy to defend Silicon Valley, by the way. But eBay is a direct derivative and consequence, of course, of what Microsoft has done and the like firms in creating the enterprise software infrastructure that permits such things that you are using in Roxbury.
Yeah,
and that's what automation brings. But I wanted to ask you just the last
you're
question.
right. You're right. Actually, I should have given eBay. It has something of the same structure as Uber. Is also making markets.
It's exactly
but
right.
That's right. You're absolutely right on that.
And of course, there's a new book coming out, The Uber of Everything, which you'll doubtless know.
But the thing is with eBay, right, is that the reason why I made the mistake is I didn't think of them as employees. I forgot about thinking of them as sort of
Which is actually
which they are certainly entrepreneurs,
Exactly.
even if they're not employees. And
Well,
you're exactly right.
They're not employers per se, but they enable
They're-
employment. Are you familiar with the Boston Consulting Group? The
Yes.
Boston study. They did last year on the correlation, it was a 5-country study, on the correlation of entrepreneurship and job formation with the access to mobile technology, specifically cell phones and smartphones. It was extraordinarily interesting in terms of this answer to this question of do you get more job formation, faster job growth, faster creation of small jobs when you look at the penetration of smartphones. It's an extraordinarily positive correlation and very encouraging, frankly. Have you seen? You haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it. It sounds certainly plausible, and I think that again, it sort of makes the point that technology isn't dooming anything. It's a question of how it's used, and I think that's the central point. So again, I mean, there's, and I just want to end on this point. I'm not, this is not a rosy speech. This is not a happy speech that I'm giving. It's actually a profoundly upset speech. I'm deeply disturbed about our country. I'm deeply disturbed about the policy debates around these problems, right? That we're not, in fact, having the right debates, which is about how to reform these programs in a way that get people to work, that we're not having the debates about how to unleash entrepreneurship in a sensible fashion. But despite that, despite all the gloom, I remain fundamentally optimistic about this country, about this city, and I remain optimistic because there is so much entrepreneurial talent, because there is so much energy, and there is so much just in this room of people who are smart and thoughtful and care about making America and New York a better place, that I just thank you for all you do for this country and this city, and thank you very much for your time here today.